and just introduce Karen Smith. Flew in from Detroit last night, flight was delayed, and she is donating her presence here this weekend for us. We are thrilled to have her. I attended the National Funeral Consumers Alliance meeting in
June.
June. I don't know where I attended it. I just don't remember. It was amazing and wonderful. And I personally thought that Karen Smith was the most dynamic, best prepared, amazing speaker. And I think we are truly honored to have her. She is the principal clinical ethicist for a 6-hospital system in Michigan, the Henry Ford hospitals. I'm looking at you, Karen, make sure I get this all right. Okay. And she is vice president of the Funeral Consumers Alliance. We are honored to have her speak to us today, Karen Smith.
Hi, gosh, thanks so much for inviting me. You know, they always said that following animals or kids was the toughest act. I think this web guy is going to be really hard to follow. So that was a great presentation. You guys have a wonderful website. I'm kind of jealous now even about our national website after seeing that. As Patty said, I am a clinical ethicist for the Henry Ford Health System, and I specialize in death and dying issues. So it's not a great stretch to imagine why I fell in love with the Funeral Consumers Alliance about 10 years ago. And I'm really passionate about both these things. My talk today is more about how to get the death you want, because I do work in a hospital and I see people die every day, and you know, just by the fact that you're here, you guys get it, right? Some people think it won't ever happen to them, it don't happen to other people. But I think it's important, and sometimes people don't talk about really, truly, how to get the death you want. So it's something that we're not afraid to talk about. And then the other part is how to get the disposal that you want, right? Your after-death choices and what they are and what you want. So we're going to talk a little bit about all that. As always, we make funerals fun. We make this whole conversation fun. My talk today is a brief history of how dying has changed due to the advances in medical technology. Again, because I work in a hospital, my job didn't exist even 50 years ago. There were no such things as medical ethicists. Because most of the time, doctors would just come out and they would wash their hands, they'd rub their hands together, they'd go, "I'm so very sorry, there's just nothing more that we can do." And that really was the fact. That was the truth. We didn't have dialysis, we didn't have ventilators, we didn't have ECMO, we didn't have SLED, we didn't have, I mean, I could go on and on and on. We didn't have those things to do. Now, there are a million things that we can do, and the difficult decisions are really deciding what we ought to do for each person. And what we ought to do for each person varies, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about how to get the death you want, and really the end statement is at the beginning. You need to start with the end in mind, and you need to start earlier than you think. It's more than just talking about advanced directives, but we are going to talk a little bit about advanced directives. And then I'm going to talk about fun with body disposal. Okay? All right, so let's go. Why talk about dying? One of the things I do at Henry Ford Hospital and Health System is we're a teaching and research center. So I educate physicians and residents and interns every single day. Part of what I do is not only doing the work, but training those that are learning in their careers and going forward. So when I talk with doctors, and I'm an ethicist, I talk about non-maleficence, right? Non-maleficence is harm. So it's a primary job of physicians is to keep patients from harm. But in order to take that duty of non-maleficence seriously, we need to think about the harms which can be prevented and how we care for the dying, and really get them to realize that we may be inadvertently harming our patients and those we care for by not fully working with them to help them achieve the deaths they want. That's the sort of harm. By having people stuck on life support that really is not benefiting them, right? It's a type of harm that we can prevent. And I told them that that is their moral duty, to prevent those sorts of harms from occurring when we can. Oftentimes, medical care works against allowing many types of the good deaths that people would choose, that people say they want. So we might need to promote less medicine earlier than we think in order to have better dying experiences. Right? So I tell the doctors, there's two types of patients, right? We all have those patients with chronic diseases, advanced diseases. We have those patients that we know are going to die sometime. And then we have those other, oh wait, there's really only one type of patients, because all of our patients are going to die sometime or another. Doctors sometimes don't get that. I think now we have to remind them of that, right? So there's only one type of patient, and it's the same type that we all are, right? There's one type of patient. This is one of my favorite books, and I really can't talk about death ever without bringing up Philip Yares. And he wrote this. This is what I call my death Bible. If you want to read a really good book, and it's thick, it's like that. It is like a death Bible. It's big. He talks about Western civilizations changing death practices, and that was really my impetus in the beginning for this book, but I love this book. And I'm going to quote him extensively, but I like to give him full credit, and I just think it's such a beautiful book. So I have 2 paper copies, 2 real text copies, and I have it electronically. That's how much I love this book. Okay. Philip Yares says, and I think it's really true, the chasm between the discussion of death in books, which is still prolific, and actual death, which is shameful and not to be talked about, is one of the strange but significant signs of our time. You're shaking your head, right? Isn't that weird? There's kind of this resurgence of death now in the death positive movement, so we're starting to get away from it just a teeny bit, and I think it's all good. But that is one of my favorite quotes of his, and I think it's truly apt. So prior to the 14th century, it really used to be understood when someone was dying, and men knew when they were dying. Again, there was very little effective medicine, very little. There was opioids, and you could sometimes get pain relief, but there was very little effective cure and treatment of even common illnesses and infections and pneumonias and things like this. And so people knew when they were dying, and they would feel they were approaching death. And in those days, death was rarely sudden. You were actually dying for a period of time. Whether you were thrown from a horse or whatever, those sort of sudden deaths that we have today from car accidents or airplane crashes or mechanical things falling into grinders, those things didn't exist. So people actually had time. They knew they were dying, and they would feel they were approaching death, and it wasn't really feared. But the sudden death was feared because it didn't give people the time to do their death work. So people that died in the night, people didn't like that. Like, ooh, that was spooky, that was bad. And people didn't like that because it didn't give them the time to do what they thought was the natural progression of death work that people needed to do when they were experiencing a thing. And it deprived the man of their experience of death. And this experience of death was very profound. Next slide. Because it allowed you, as the dying person, once you knew your death was approaching, you suddenly became, go to the next slide, the chance to get the lead in the play, the act of your death. Right? That's what they call it, the final act. It was the final act. It gave you that time where you would call forth, right, from lands far away. You know, the king is dying, everybody has to go. So everybody would go, and they would go and stand behind or stand beside the bed of the dying person and do that. And so the dying person was actually the lead in this play. People were born in public, people died in public, and it was kind of a community event that everybody paid attention to on what was going on. Even if they were a stranger, they would give that respect. Even if you think about in the old days when they used to cover the door to let everybody know, there was a lot of symbolism that would happen, and it would transform even that dying man's room into kind of a public place. People would come by to pay respects, right, to give and receive apologies and forgiveness, and to have those final words. So from those days, death has changed tremendously. It used to be even children, and we're going to see some of this in some slides coming up, were aware. So even if you were a small child and you were dying, you would be elevated to that role and have that death role and experience. But now, nothing really remains of that sense that everyone has or should have of his impending death, or that kind of public solemnity surrounding the moment of death, which used to be appreciated, is now hidden. And what used to be solemn and spiritual is now often just merely avoided, completely avoided. Currently, 80% of deaths occur in hospitals, and just like births, deaths and births were taken from this public space of your home. They both used to occur in your home, and it was public, and people would come and go in your home, and your families, and your children, and your grandparents, everybody was in your home, and that's how those things happened. Both of these events, both birth and death, were moved into a hospital and behind closed hospital doors, right? There was a time when all births, even the fathers, had to wait out in the waiting room. We will let you know when it's okay, This magical thing called birth is going on, and no one can see it, even though it's happened for, millions and millions of years. It's going to be private, and you wait here. We'll let you know when you have a shiny new baby to come look at. And the same way with death. Once you went into the hospital, those doors closed, and you were in the hospital, and the doctors were doing what doctors do. And then they would come out, and they would say, we're so sorry, we did everything we could, he's passed. So that being there with someone when they're dying was pretty much taken away by the middle of the 19th century. So that's kind of where that statement comes from Philip Yerkes. It used to be public, now it's private. We're kind of changing it a little bit now. Okay. So how do these changes occur? And now, it used to be the families were the ones that were there, they were taking care of the dying person, it wasn't seen as strange, it was a natural process. Now the way it comes, death and dying is so chronic, it's really hard to tell. There's one study that was in JAMA that said how absolutely horrible physicians are at predicting when someone will die of a terminal illness that's known to be terminal. Terrible, right? So they have no really idea. So now even families then kind of switch from caring for someone who's dying to not letting someone know they're dying or avoiding that real honest discussion of it, which doesn't allow that giving and receiving of forgiveness and all of those things to occur because it's kind of kept at bay. So our everyday change from accepting that onslaught of dying as a person and having that role to play is taken from us. So that's something I think that we have lost with the advent of modern technology and medicines and things like that. We kind of lose that knowing or that feeling of one's impending death until sometimes the very, very last seconds, and sometimes not even then, okay? The death of Ivan Illich is a classic in medical ethics, and we still use it to teach residents and interns. And it shows this progression, right? Because even in the literature, by the time we get to Tolstoy and the death of Ivan Illich, go to the next slide, Ivan Illich didn't have this thing of dying. He felt that he was dying. He thought, maybe I'm dying. Am I dying? No. His family's kept from all over. Even in Tolstoy's work, if we go from the 3 deaths, which he wrote in 1859, the peasant who was dying said, I heard all over death is here, and I know what it is. So if you look only 30 years later by Ivan Illich in 1886, things were starting to change and they were developing vaccines and some of those things were coming online. And by the time Ivan Illich gets there, he had a floating kidney. And his wife just kept saying, no, you're fine. Just take your medicine. You'll be fine. Well, he really was dying. He was trying to call forth and have these conversations. And even then, people were pushing back against him. No, it's just a floating. Just do what your doctor says. You're going to be better in no time, right? So it started to change. Working in the hospitals in the early 1990s, when I was just starting out in my career, we started to see this change of people taking the lead. And I think it started a lot with the AIDS epidemic, right? People accepting that they were dying and wanting something different, wanting to kind of open those closed doors of the hospital and take some control back. And now I think it's imperative, and I try to empower people even in the hospital situation, we must take the lead with our doctors, right? Part of your responsibility is to, why don't you just tell them what you want? Rather than have to have doctors with paternalism always telling us what to do and just doing that. We need to really partner and tell them what we want going forward. Go. So I always say, remember Dr. Ruth, talking about sex won't make you pregnant. That's what she always said. And talking about death won't kill you. So true, it's true. I talk about death all the time and I'm still here, right? So talk about death, it's okay. Oftentimes, by the time someone comes into hospice, most patients are turned into hospice within their final week of life. That doesn't allow you to get the benefit from hospice. That doesn't allow you to really think about what you need to move that final transition. When we think about having a baby when you're born, 9 months you prepare to have a child and give birth. Sometimes a year or 2 years, people plan to get married, right? A big life transition. People don't plan their deaths very well. You need to really also think this is your last transition. You need to think about what you want and what you don't want. What you don't want is just as important. So the tragedy of death remains. Death used to be a tragedy, often comic, acted out for the benefit of a man who was about to die. Today, death is a comedy, always tragic, acted out for the benefit of a man who does not know he's about to die. This is a tragedy that I see every day. And I really work with doctors in family meetings, and they're talking about wanting to do this or do that or not do this and not do that every single day. I have this little cat on the edge of my folder that I carry into these family meetings. And I say it's so important for you to say to the family, I'm so sorry he's dying. And they said, well, I can't say that. I'm like, yeah, you can. That's what you need to say. They need to know it. Not his PCO2 is going up and we're not going to be able to get it back down. You know, those creatinine numbers are going up and he's not eligible for dialysis. I wanted you to know that. That means nothing to like the majority of the world. But I'm so sorry he's dying. People get that. I really think it's time to get your family in and everybody who's important so you could have the next few days, because then I think he's probably going to get worse and may not be able to talk with you. Rather than just going on and on with the numbers and the letters, right? We need to really have a conversation, okay? There's 4 common death trajectories. Have any of you seen this before? This is real knowledge. You need to know this, and you need to learn it. So here's sudden death. You have high functionality. This axis is your function. This axis is time, over time. So sudden death, you're fine, you get hit by the bus. Okay? So you're fine until you get hit by the bus and die. Sudden death. Still relatively few people die that way. Terminal illness, and terminal illness now, cancer is kind of become a chronic illness. It's a terminal illness, you may have it, but you're functioning, high functioning for oftentimes, even pancreatic, brain cancers, high functioning for a pretty good long period of time sometimes, until you aren't, and then you have a relatively steep trajectory into death. So a lot of terminal illness will look like this because we're really good. We have a lot of really good medicines and treatments now to keep people functioning, even when we know that ultimately their disease will overtake them until they die. This is where most people go, and this is called organ failure, but think of it as any chronic illness. So diabetes, heart failure, lung disease, COPD, all of those are basic organ failures, right? So diabetes is kidney failure, heart failure, liver, COPD, all of those things. Because you may be functioning, your function goes down a little bit due to this chronic illness, and you have dips. You may be admitted to the hospital. And every time you come out, your peak doesn't go up quite as high as you were before. And maybe you dip way far down and you're in the hospital for a longer dip, right? It could be longer. And then you come up, but you don't go quite as high up as you were before. And you keep going this way. So this is where most people go. But the thing is you never know how many dipsy-doos, you're going to have before you reach your death, right? You just don't know that part. And this is a death with dementia or frailty, where the quality goes really low and the tail just keeps going and going. So these are basically the 4 common death trajectories. And this is something that if you take nothing else, like, be aware of this, okay? This is a piece of knowledge. Okay, next. So, these differing death trajectories can affect your ability to carry out your death work and things you have on. So it may affect obligations. One, we talked about you don't know which peak will be your last or which valley will in fact be your death, right? You don't always know that. Concerns with dementia, and a lot of people have dementing illnesses and they complete advanced directives. How many of you have advanced directives? All right, better than some, but you guys can do better. Okay, brief aside from my talk. Who knows what Karen Ann Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan, and Terry Schiavo all have in common?
No direct.
True.
What did she say?
Controversy. So here's the thing. Nancy Cruzan, Karen Ann Quinlan, and Terry Schiavo are the three most famous ethics cases of the day. All of these were young women in the prime of their life, like you, Ashley, prime of their life, working, who had spouses and also had parents still living. They did not have advanced directives, and when they had medical illnesses that put them in a chronic vegetative state, their families were ripped apart, because they didn't have advanced directives stating what their wishes were for their end-of-life care. Now, all of you are great because you all accept and realize that you at some point in time will die. Do yourselves a favor and complete an advanced directive and tell your children to complete advanced directives with their wishes. Everybody should have an advanced directive, okay? One of the problems about who to really listen to is when you have an advanced directive, my advanced directive does say, if I ever have a dementing illness with progressive dementia, I want only comfort-based treatment, and I refuse any and all, even antibiotics, except for a urinary tract infection, because those are really painful and you only have to take a couple of pills and then you can do better. It's in there, right? Because it's important to me. It sounds silly. But if I say I don't want any of that, but then I'm the happily demented Karen, because I would be happily demented, I have no doubt. My grandmother was super happily demented. But for me, with a PhD in philosophy, if I don't have my intellect, that's not my person. I will feel that my dignity is so affronted by that. I would rather not. Right? But if the happily demented person says, oh, well, my heart's beating and the doctor wants me to have a pacemaker, okay. Right? And patients are always assumed to have capacity as long as they agree with what the doctor's proposing. True story. That's the truth. So as long as I'm crazy as I'll get at, but if I agree with what the doctor says, that's fine. So you have to really think about who we're going to listen to, the current John who's demented or the former John who didn't want anything done. And that's the concept of precedent autonomy. So really clear advanced directives will help you. That's one way to get the death you want, is to have a clear advanced directive. Not only have it, but talk to your family about it. Not just the one person who's your agent, but talk to all of your family. So everybody's heard what Sally wants and doesn't want. I know, Mom, you've told us all again. We know. But that's okay, right? Yeah. These are important talks. As I have, this had better be important out in the middle of a conference call when death comes calling. They're important talks, okay? So there's some ugly little truths about death. We all think that we know what we want, we think we're going to do advanced directives, we're going to have it all taken care of. At the time of actual death, 3/4 of us are non-ambulatory, 1/3 of us are incontinent, and 40%, which is increasing up, are cognitively impaired. Those are the facts. Everybody thinks, when I die, I'm still going to be me and I'm going to be fine, and then I'm just going to die. That's not really the truth, okay? We all say, of course, that we'd rather die surrounded by friends and family, but behind this wish is usually another, more often unspoken, that we should die in a decent manner, preferably well-dressed, makeup unsmeared, face undistorted by pain or unbroken by violence, still pink, flushed, and untainted by anything quite as inoffensive as blood. Right? That's kind of the picture that we all have that's not really the reality. But we have to deal with reality, right? Of course we do. This is pretty much the death that people don't want. Most of the time, they say they don't want to end up in ICU with tubes coming out of everywhere, hooked up to a bunch of machines. This is what we call the technological imperative. It starts out, or the ethics waterfall, right? You start out with one thing you don't want, And then, well, that's okay, I can do that. And then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, because it doesn't happen all at once. If you saw that, you would say no. But it doesn't start with that. It starts with a pacemaker when you're 75, and then, no. It starts with a hip at 68, and the pacemaker at 75, and right? So you have to think about it, how to end up not getting the death you don't want. Go on. How to get the death you want. So here's the take-home points. Think, really think. And I don't know what it is for any of you, but you need to think about what it would be. Acknowledge which potential trajectory is likely for you. You need to clearly identify the keystone markers in advance. If you have a chronic illness, talk with your physician. What is, when you're healthy, when you're diagnosed with something, what is the likely trajectory for this illness? Is it ending up on a ventilator when you get a bad pneumonia? Is that something you would choose or not choose? Is it ending up in a nursing home? What is it? What is the likely, is it going on dialysis? Is it not being able to swallow and having to have a feeding tube? So what is the likely trajectory of your illnesses? Have conversations with your doctor so that you know well in advance. And you need to think about what your goals are for your death and share those with your doctors. Have those conversations, so that your doctor is aware of what you would want, what you would not want. Put those wishes down in advance directives and share them. That's how to get them. And you can amend them anytime you want. Right? You think of something different, I now have a 1.5 single space typed page addendum to my advance directive because I think about this crap all the time. So talk with your family and friends about your wishes. In the end, when you lose your capacity, they're only wishes. So you have to make that. You have to promise your kids you will haunt them forever. Wishes, right? So you have to talk with them. Realize, and this is the hard part, realize that you'll need to start accepting less care earlier than you think in order to get the death that you say you want. When your doctors are talking to you about things, medical care going forward, you need to ask to hear about all of the options, including doing nothing. Right? Right. Enough of that. Encourage your patients, this is from when I gave a doctor talk, make demands on family and friends. Go ahead, right? Go ahead when you're dying. Tell them what you want. Use your words. It's hard. Tell them how important it is that you want them to be by your side. I don't give a flute if they're in California. It's time for you to say, hey, it's time, come. I want you to come. I want to see you now. I feel good now. I've been diagnosed with stage 3 metastatic cancer. I want you to come visit me, and this summer we're going to do something fun, right? Let them know how important it is. Go back to pre-kindergarten. Use your words. Your kids aren't mind readers. Your friends aren't mind readers. You have to tell them what you want and why it's important to you. If you can't do it because some families just don't talk, right? Or they just don't talk about those things. Go ahead. Send a letter. Send an email. Whatever you do, but do it. Have those real conversations and share your fears, concerns, and hopes. You might honestly be pleasantly surprised that it'll be easier than you think once you get started. Even if you say, hey, there is this lady who gave this talk who said, I should talk to you about this, Go ahead, that's fine. And ask for help. After all, we're only human, right? You don't have to get it perfect. You just have to make a start. So this is a picture of a little lady who is in a nursing home, and this was her wish. She used her words. She says, you know what, I really want to see my horse again before I die. If you use your words, if you tell people what you want, you can get it, sometimes in the most unimaginable ways, right? Okay, next slide. Now we're on to the fun stuff. Now you're dead. We're going to talk about body disposal and how to get the disposal you want. We're going to resurrection of the dead. I just really like this picture, right, with all the people in the caskets. It's just really my transitional slide. So with body disposition, talking about options things like that. I think this is a really great slide. In the 18th century and before, oftentimes church floors, and Kyle told me that King's Chapel here has this. In fact, the church floors used to be paved with the individual tombstones of those wealthy donors that would do it. So churches were actually built upon the remains of their patrons, which I think is really cool. So the structures were actually raised upon the dead. Okay? Things changed. Early American funerals, which is kind of where we're all from, so that's what I'll talk most about, at the turn of the century, were still held at home in the front parlor. And it wasn't even really called anything. It's just what you did. You know, if somebody died, you took care of them. It wasn't a home funeral. It wasn't a green funeral. It was just what people had to do when people died, is you had to take care of them, right? People would come. If you were invited, you always had to come to the funeral. Embalming was not a practice. You were just simply laid out, oftentimes on a door, on wood slates, on a kitchen table, whatever. You were laid out and people came, they paid their respects, they dug a hole, they went in the barn and built a pine coffin, right, a pine box to put you in, and that's what happened. Early American funerals at the turn of the century still happened at home. Prior to the Civil War, embalming wasn't a big practice. Embalming started with the Civil War when all of the Northern soldiers went down to the South, fought and were killed. The families wanted their sons back. They wanted their bodies back. And so embalming was started in order to preserve those bodies so they could be transported back north for burials with their family. Abraham Lincoln was the first one lying in state, right, as a president, and then people started to accept this as a practice, as a common practice, to allow this public viewing. The Victorian era, really, it would so have sucked to have been a woman in the Victorian era when people died. 2 strict years of mourning. And so this was an era where it went from doing what you did at home and just taking care of practicalities, like talk about a bell curve swing, to this really mandated sort of dying and funeral practices where there was garb for men and women for a period of time in mourning that you had to have, and everything was done. And you actually had to buy your mourning wear from the mourning warehouse and clothes specifically for widows to wear for a period of 2 years. It was mandatory that they wear all black. You know, we would call them goth today, but that wasn't really the reason. This is some of the Victorian mourning wear and the caskets going on from early times, heavily laden with flowers. Next slide. But still, very much funerals were a family affair, and that even children were around and involved. And these days, oftentimes, even still in the hospital, people will ask me, well, you know, we have children. Should they be able to come in and see them? He's died. Like, yeah, he's their dad, and he's dead. They need to see him, you know. And I say for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, children were aware that people died, and they dealt with it, and they touched them, and, you know, it's not catchy. So still, they're a family affair, even in the old times one. Funeral homes, this was one of the first embalming. If you see this, it says embalming from the South. It was a barn, because it didn't used to be that embalming was only done by funeral directors. It was done by people who learned how to do it and made a little business in doing it to get the body shipped back up, right? So, you know, this was it. You can do that. That was fine. You put up a sign, embalming, you know? Now we have more traditional sort of funeral homes, and they're marketed as that, so people know where to go. As we progress in our body disposition, we move to this futuristic type of embalming to delay putrefaction. You can see they're very large bore. You can't see the needles. They're very large bore needles, very large tubing that goes in to do 2 things. One is we want to remove the blood from the deceased body, and we want to then use the same arteries, veins, all of our circulation to input the embalming chemicals in order to preserve the body. Next. Today, embalming is really not much different. Going in a jugular, we have these really cool things. That one's probably old. I'm sure you could tell me there's newer ones now, but that was the only picture I could find of doing embalming. And we have embalming rooms, and there's like a list of regulations as long as your arm, right, Kyle? about regulations for embalming. So you go from something that was done in somebody's barn 100 or so years ago to a list of state and federal regulations for embalming, and that even funeral homes who don't do embalming in some states have to have an embalming room with a sink and all these other things in order to go through, right? Yep. Yep. Right. Even if you run a Jewish funeral home, you have to have a license and have all these things for embalming, even if no one is embalmed, right?
Or Muslim.
Or Muslims, right? So some crazy regulations. So embalming is still done. The regulations have gone, increased prices and all those things. That has moved us forward to where we are. But if we talk about death in the world, this is a traditional American sort of funeral look. Everybody's embalmed, we're in a casket, we look nice, we have our hands crossed. But in most of the world, the majority of the world still is, if they're buried in caskets, they're very simple wooden caskets, or sometimes they're often just simply covered in a shroud and placed in the earth, without any of the chemicals, without any of the fancy $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 caskets. Very sort of simple. So if you take a larger global world view, we are still very unique in our funerary practices. So what's a proper send-off? And I have several slides of some very different practices that still go on and how we think of it. I grew up in northern Indiana, and there's a lot of Amish around. There's still a lot of Amish across the nation. This is still how they do it. It's not so different. I mean, their practices have remained traditional, and that is a proper send-off. In Hollywood, this is a proper send-off. Next. Is change always good, right? So here's a simple pine box, or I think this was a $50,000 golden casket. So a lot of choices. And so you can only imagine there's a lot of room in here. Right? There's a lot of room for choice. Next. Natural versus customary. Natural death, green burial, the rocks. You know, the Indians really had it right. Remember in the Old West when you see those movies and they come across the Indians, it's just a pile of rocks on a body, so that when the body decomposed, the rocks would just go down and you'd have flat earth again. Like, wow, that's pretty smart, and they've been doing that forever. as opposed to some of our practices. Next. Again, more and more as our world gets more populated, it's like, what's an appropriate use of space? This is a beautiful cemetery, and it is lovely. And I love that today there were so many people out here for so many different reasons. There are birders. I saw people with binoculars, like Josh and I took a walk, and someone with binoculars are looking up there. There are people just taking pictures. In the early 19th century, people used to come to cemeteries to have picnics, and that was where they would come. It was the green spaces in the early industrialized eras that were well maintained. So people would come here to have picnics in parks. Now, not so much. Oftentimes we see these things that are sometimes mowed, sometimes not really taken care of. It's a lot of space and a lot of land. Things are changing in terms of memorials. In the old days, nobody had to have a 3-page write-up to tell us that Harold died. He was there dead in front of us. We knew Harold was the one that died. We didn't need to have, Harold Smith, born and married to Josie Ann, had 3 kids. We knew that. And now some of those things are just excluded. We're getting into all these specialty objects and things, right? You can carry your loved one's ashes in a locket. You can have them made into a diamond. You can, all these things. A lot of different types of memorials. I think it shows, people are thinking differently. There's a lot of different things out there. And every day, almost every day, because people know I love this death and dying stuff, people will send me stuff. I'm like, wow. I mean, honestly, like 5 years ago, would anyone have known what a mushroom suit was? No, we wouldn't have. Right? And now everybody knows, oh, Luke Perry was buried in a mushroom suit. Yeah, we all know that, right? Okay, next. Caskets. Again, anything you want. From natural to organic to golden to, I don't know what that is, but I thought it was kind of cool. Many different options for caskets. A lot of things that are unusual these days. Walmart. Everybody knows you buy your caskets at Walmart, right? We all know that. Right? That's like the pledge of FCA. You buy your, if you're not getting a natural or woven one or cardboard one that you're going to draw on, and you're not making your own pine box, you get it at Walmart. And they are required. They ship anywhere in the nation, and every funeral home across our nation is required to accept your handmade or outside purchased casket without charging you anything. So I always tell people that buying a casket in the casket room is like buying wine at an expensive restaurant, because it's marked up 3 to 5 times. And if you want to do that, if you want to spend $20,000 on a solid mahogany casket, I want you to, right? If that's what you want, I want you to have the funeral you want and the death you want. So if that's what you want, do it, but don't feel that you had to. Right? Because Walmart could ship you one in 24 to 48 hours, charging you 1/3 price. Okay, good. So we all know now there's greener ways to go. This is looking at the standard burial in a metal casket with a vault liner underground, probably embalmed inside there. Hopefully they don't tell you that the sealing gasket and casket will prevent you from decomposing. Thank you. That was the word I couldn't get. Because it doesn't happen. Or a more natural burial. This one is in a woven casket, or you could use a shroud, or you could use a mushroom suit. You could, whatever floats your boat. So there are greener ways to go. Next. Cremation. Y'all got to see the crematory here. Simple ways. This is a pretty pricey casket to be using for cremation. We would probably could choose a cardboard container, which you could color and put signs on and anything you want. Go. Again, lots of different things. An example of cremains coming out afterwards. And there's a lot of things, and I was talking with someone earlier today about, those titanium hips and joints that everybody's getting in. Precious metal. What happens to all that precious metal? After you're cremated, it's still precious metal. Right? So thinking ahead about how to not only get the death you want, but the disposal that you want. If you have those precious metals, now a lot of the good crematoriums will allow you to donate your precious metal remains to a charity, right? Because if you don't, they just take that money, it gets recycled, and that's cream off the top, sometimes. So you can do that. There are also, you cannot be cremated with the pacemaker. The pacemakers need to come out. Working in a hospital, unfortunately, I know way too often we have 97-year-old patients who get a pacemaker and die 3 days later. Yeah, so it happens. In the United States, we are not allowed to reuse medical devices, but there are a few companies, and FCA has a brochure on it about agencies that will accept medical devices for recycling, and they are able to be used in African countries and save lives, right? They're recycled, they're clean, they're reused. Large animal hospitals, the University of Tennessee uses them for horses, for large dogs, and things like that. So again, I know it sounds kind of gross, right? But there are things you could do, and it's like reduce, reuse, recycle, all of those things. And people don't always think about that when it comes to things that they have put in their bodies that are not of their body, right? So we need to start thinking a little bit more about those things. Go. Unusual. Even though there are many urns for purchase, just like you can go in the casket room, there's a million urns you can purchase. But you know what? It's your death, it's your life, what you want. If you really love your Mickey Mouse cookie jar, and your whole family has their whole life thought about Aunt Sally because of her Mickey Mouse cookie jar, that is a perfectly fine place to keep Aunt Sally for the hereafter. Perfectly fine, right? Minnie Mouse, whatever. Any of those is fine, okay? Alkaline hydrolysis, now becoming a big thing. That's a really ancient picture of an alkaline hydrolysis machine too, right? Gosh. Sorry, I need to update my slides some. Go to the next slide. Alkaline hydrolysis is in some ways similar to cremation, except for they use chemicals. Next slide. Or they now are calling it aquamation. That's kind of a cool name too. I still like I don't know.
You mentioned Washington's law.
It's coming. It's coming, sister. Hang on. Stop pushing me. So aquamation, we take our body 95% water, 5% alkaline chemicals, hydroxide, so alkaline hydrolysis. Hydroxide breaks the bonds between the chemicals in the body, which is a process called hydrolysis, right? Converting them to the basic building blocks in heat, but not as much heat as in cremation. So people that are worried about thermal pollution, as well as, covering up the land and things, aquamation is better. It ends up with a sterile effluent that can be safely put down your pipes. If anybody saw Catherine Good, she has some great talks about this, and they say, oh, we're putting grandma in the sewer system. Well, that's not the case. Those are people who are afraid of change, right? And you end up with bone fragments, calcium phosphate. Next. This slide, the purpose of this entire slide is to show you, this is an old slide about where alkaline hydrolysis was legal. It was legal only in these, what was it, 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In the 7 states initially. Let's go to the next slide. And now alkaline hydrolysis is accepted in all of these green states and being considered in the other light blue states. So you can see in just a short number of years, in like 5 years, alkaline hydrolysis has really made tremendous progress, right? So a lot of people are now considering it. And so I can say, if you don't have it now, it's coming soon to a state near you, right? And that's really true, because it is growing so quickly. Similar remains between cremation and hydrolysis. The outcome looks very similar. Okay. Can we just, yes, right? Here we go. These are all my friends, the Recompose gang from Washington. Where were we, Josh? Was that Minneapolis when Katrina?
Yes.
Minneapolis. FCA convention in Minneapolis 4 years ago? Oh, I'm so
4 or
tired.
6.
4 or 6? Oh, she presented it in
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I believe you.
Her first talked to us about her dream for Recompose. Then it was called the Urban Death Project when she first presented it about a new way of having disposal of your body so that you don't end up as cremains and rocks and stuff. You end up as beautiful natural material. She came up with this thing with the right mix of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, and natural microbial activity transforms dead organic material, that's us, into humified matter like mulch or compost, right? So what does this look like? When we first saw it, if you were the first slide, Katrina envisioned it like this. As you would start on the 6th floor, this is a tall container filled with alfalfa, wood chips, and oxygen that's piped in to add further decomposition as it goes. Your body would be carried by your family up to the top in an organic shroud and placed at the top. And by the time you sifted down, you would come out the bottom as mulch that could be used in parks and gardens.
How long are we talking?
About 6 months, she suggested, right? Because we pump in added oxygen to help that decomposition. But really, natural. This is the new version with these little pods of how they envision this decomposition going on in these chambers with the oxygen pumped into the wood chips and that, but a very beautiful green space. So this is what we're envisioning recomposing to look like. And Washington was the first state to actually pass this with their alkaline hydrolysis law. So this, my wish now, and my husband knows, my only wish is to live long enough to be recomposed. That is my wish. Okay, next slide. So just like with how to get the death you want, do it your way. There are so many options today. And I don't even know what's coming down in the next 5 or 10 years, right? It could be something else we haven't even thought of. There's so many options. What's important to getting the send-off you want, again, like I said before, is to think about exactly what it would be. Then talk to your family. Again, use your words. If you can't use your words, write it down, right? Complete a packet, such as our FCA booklet or other packet with all the information that your family needs, right? Such as this. Before I go, you should know, this is a great thing. It is so cheap. It's $15 to buy the paper if you're a paper person, and it's $9.99 to download it from our website. It has, I gave one to my dad like years and years ago when we first completed a new version for Christmas. And I said, what I want for Christmas is for you to complete this so that I know what you want, and I'm not making it up, and my crazy half-step-brother and half-step-sister are dragging me crazy trying to say what they want, right? I want what you want, so do it. So complete these booklets. We always say pre-plan, don't prepay, right? Next. Oh, see, I had a slide because I didn't know that Paula was going to bring me the real things. And she has some of these for sale. So if you don't have this yet, really, everybody should have an advance directive, and everybody should have a before I go, you should know. I really think that. Next slide.
You mean you have them here?
Yes.
Yeah, we do. So, wow, I'm doing good on time too. So here we are. So what I want to say is please support both your local Funeral Consumers Alliance of East Tennessee and
Excuse me?
Eastern Massachusetts, sorry, FCA of Eastern Massachusetts. I wrote it right, I just didn't say it right. And support our national FCA at funerals.org. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed some of the things I said, if you're interested by ethics or death and dying issues, you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter as Ethics Chick. There's my email. I actually have some cards out there if you ever think you need to get in touch with me or like this talk and want to hear it somewhere else. And I think I'm done. Thank you so much.
Amazing, covering everything, death and disposal. So this is the time for questions, and Karen will come up and answer. So we just ask that you use the microphone so that we can all hear you.
Okay, I have two things I want to ask. The first one is when you were talking about Walmart, I went into, my mother died in February, I'm one of 3 girls. I went into the meeting with the funeral people fully armed with all the information I needed. I mean, I was knowledgeable.
Of course you are,
I
because you're an
was.
FCA
I'm a
member.
librarian, so I
Right,
did
because you're an
this.
FCA member.
But what I wanted to say in front of everybody here is that the funeral home, and they were family friends, they intimidated us about the casket. Because I said up front, I don't want my mom about. Oh, well, you need to get this that's got the, I don't know what they call the word, but so that all the gases escape.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
like, all right.
The
but I heard-
sealed gasketed
That's
casket.
it, yeah.
We know.
Sealed gas or something.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
Anyway, I said, I don't give a hoot, as long as
Sorry,
it's
that's
not,
on tape.
because she already had a plot paper. I said, okay, as long as she's not bound. And then they said, well, I said, I want to order a casket from, not Walmart, but some other company, because I know they could ship it overnight, and I'm gonna save maybe 35, 40%. He goes, we can do that, but there's no guarantee that it will get here in good condition. I'm like, shit. What if it comes and it's not in good condition? So they really intimidated us
Fear
into buying that
tactics.
expensive one.
Yeah, awful.
And we're fairly intelligent people.
Yeah.
Oh, can I ask one quick question? I learned about this new job that's up. It's a doula. You know what a doula is? They have death doulas now.
I know.
I'd like to be one. How do I learn about that?
Talk to Patty.
Okay, well, thank you.
First question.
Yeah. So that's not uncommon, right? Here we have an intelligent, informed FCA member who knows what she wants and knows what she doesn't want. The critical factor when somebody in your family dies, you are situationally vulnerable, right? That term, situationally vulnerable, because you aren't thinking as clearly because you are grieving, right? You know what you want, but yet you start to question yourself. And they do try to intimidate you because a lot of funerals, I mean, it's a business, so you have to just stick to your guns. And I always say, bring a friend with you, but someone who's not like your super closest friend, or knew the person that died as close as you did, but someone that can help you stand up, say, this is what I want. This is what my mom wanted. This is our plan. Can you help me stick to our plan? Even if you know all that stuff, that can help sometimes, okay? And we have a death doula here. It's not FCA, but I mean, we're talking about these things. Several.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of FCA. A lot of our friends of FCA are home celebrants or home funeral people or death doulas. Again, the death positive culture is really changing. We are making some progress. So learn all you can about those things, and I think it's going to continue to go with different options. Any other questions?
Can I
Yeah, sure.
speak to that? Hi. Emily McClatchy, hanging back there, and I both went through the same death doula training. Or do we have any other death doulas in the room? No. In training, we've got one more. And say it again.
She starts on Wednesday.
Start on Wednesday. So you've got 2 trained, 2 more. It's like we have birth doulas to help women through the birthing process, and we have death doulas doing the same thing. I would also mention on an earlier point about why funeral homes may put some pressure on you, something I've learned through FCA. We have so many more funeral homes than statistics would say that we actually need, and they have high overhead. They have to be available 24/7. So they have high overhead, and we're not dying as quickly. So there are a lot of funeral homes, and so it is quite possible, not say they will, but it is quite possible that you might receive some pressure to get some of the more high-end products that they have. So I just want to mention those 2 things. See us separately later about the doula thing. And we have conflict of interest forms that all the active members, board members, advisory councils, all are signing. So this whole issue, FCA is working on nationally, we are working on locally to figure out appropriate boundaries between one area and the next. So I just want to say that that is all in process. Thank you.
Sure.
And as far as advanced directives go, is there a resource that you recommend that lists more choices than the original living will, which is too simple?
Yeah. A living will is too simple, and most especially, a living will states that it's only valid when and if you're diagnosed with a terminal illness. And you may have one of those chronic illnesses that is going and it won't really affect you, and it's not a very effective tool for your choice. An advanced directive allows you to assign someone to be a real life person there to carry out your wishes in a variety of settings, most of which you don't know by the time you're that sick. So assigning someone that's a person and then having conversations with that person who's your agent is the best way. Say, and to talk about what values are important to you, not necessarily specific things like a feeding tube or this or that. I walk out tomorrow, run into a concrete pillar, get a closed head injury, and I can't eat. I have on my advanced directive, I don't want a feeding tube, but you know what? If it's because I'm in a coma for 3 weeks because I ran into a post and had a concussion, yeah, give me a feeding tube for a couple of weeks and I'll get rid of it, you know? So you need to have someone that knows what your values are, right, regarding that. What you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to accept going forward. So that's it. And as far as a specific advanced directive, the legality of them varies state by state by state. So you have to make sure that you have an advanced directive form that's valid in your state. But again, advanced directives aren't always one and done. There's something that I say you need to complete, and then you need to look at again. And this is especially true to tell your children and your friends. Every 5 years, or whenever your life situation changes or your health situation changes, if you have your spouse as your advocate and he has you as his, and one of you dies, you need to have a new advanced directive, right? If you have your daughter as your agent and your daughter decides to move to London for this job of a lifetime, you may need to have a new agent. So it's not a one and done thing.
So, take it. Karen.
In Massachusetts, it's the healthcare proxy, it's the advanced proxy. Okay, healthcare proxy in Massachusetts. Yes. Everything's about the state. Other questions?
Not exactly a question, but as the membership secretary, I send packets out to new members, and I know there was...
Can't hear.
A little closer, yeah, there you
A
go.
little closer.
Closer?
Closer.
I hear you. Okay. So as membership secretary, I get the names of new members and I send out to the new membership information, including the Before I Go booklet. It's a $30 membership fee for a lifetime membership in this organization. So it's an incredible value. And for that $30, you get this $15 booklet plus a
That's a
lot of
great
other
deal.
information. So it's quite a deal. And there were 2 people who joined today who didn't get their booklets because I brought them late. So if you come to me, I will give them to you.
Yes, next slide.
This is a comment. In the word disposal, we used it in the Greenboro, Massachusetts brochure, and somebody objected vociferously. If you change it to disposition, it's not
Okay,
offensive.
okay.
Also, the word putrefaction was misspelled in your.
Thank you.
Oh, dear.
I love that.
Send me a brief.
I need you. Where were you before? Thank you.
She's our newsletter editor.
That is amazing. Thank you.
Actually, I grew up on Bishop Hill, and the Redemptionist Fathers run a facility there. The St. Alphonsus is the name of a hall at the back of this massive church built by Irish immigrants. And I one day looked him up, and he actually he was a 14th century bishop who founded them, Preparations for Death. It's actually on Amazon.com. Granted, it's medieval. But his first chapter alone on the rich man is in his bed, his possessions are now in somebody else's. It's really well worth it. It's actually, if you haven't read it, it might be something.
I would love to.
Because it does give the mindset. It's basically preparation for sermons and other things, meditations, but the whole issue of preparation for death was how they had that whole, as you said, system set up to prepare, and not just simply when it happens, what are we going to do?
All right, I love that. Please take one of my cards and email me that reference again so that I can make sure and get it, because I would love that. Anybody else?
We're running out.
Last question?
Okay, this is a difficult question for me to ask, but it's one that I feel up answering because I don't have an answer myself. If you don't have a family, and you don't have a significant other, and you're old, I'm 81, so I'm old enough that my closest friends have died over the last 2 years. Where do you find I think you call it an agent.
Super good question. And I applaud you for even having the courage to bring it up and to be thinking about these issues, right? So several things I would suggest, and it can happen to any of us that we end up in that position at any time. What I say is one, have clear conversations with your physician. Develop a relationship with your primary physician about what you would want and what you would not want and what your values are regarding that. And if you're in a community where you plan to be, that physician relationship is good. You can still complete an advance directive stating your wishes regarding other things. Most healthcare providers are prevented by state laws from being patient advocates because they have that conflict of interest in treating you. I don't know what the state law is. Do you know what the state law is in Massachusetts?
I'd like to add a little bit more on this conversation.
Yeah.
Sure.
About guardianship and
Right, yeah.
also, getting involved in.
So guardianship is a possibility, and working in a hospital when patients come in that don't have advocates, we sometimes go through the state for a guardian. You could do that, but it would be somebody you would need to have a relationship with so they could get to know your values. And again, have those conversations about what's important to you, what's not important to you, and establishing that perhaps a trust officer to make sometimes fulfill those duties. If you have more ideas, Ashley.
Guardianship is a highly unregulated position in our culture.
The comment is that guardianship is highly unregulated.
And if you want to be proactive in helping other people who are affected by guardianship law at the end of life to get involved in creating a much better system.
Yeah.
That we all need to
Advocacy.
be active in advocacy.
I just had a comment about advance directives, and an advance directive is only as good as it can be accessed when it's needed, right? So if you are planning ahead and making an advance directive, make it your top priority to be easily accessible and also known to your physician. And I was going to say to you, in 2017, Medicare started paying doctors reimbursing for advanced care planning as part of your annual wellness visit.
Yeah.
So you are entitled, as part of your annual wellness visit,
To have that
get-
conversation.
to have an hour or more conversation about
If you're
what,
on Medicare.
yes.
What your end of life wishes
But
are.
most insurance companies follow Medicare. So most insurance companies will provide this benefit as well. It's just, and you can use it as much as you want, and it's part of, every year you're entitled to that benefit.
Because your wishes will change, right? So it's not a one and done.
And I would mention this lovely tool that most of us have, our phones. It's a great place to put a copy of your advance directive. Don't put it on a piece of paper and have it at home, and then you go for a visit to the hospital and suddenly there you are and you don't have it. So very good time. I would like to,
I just want to add that in Massachusetts law, they're not required to honor the advance directive.
the comment was in Massachusetts law, they are not required to honor advanced directives.
Having a healthcare proxy.
Right.
The healthcare proxy is the critical
Yes.
document you must have to have your wishes honored, is to have a live person making it happen for you. I think that's true under much broader than even just this one point. You need an advocate. Whether you're going to a funeral home, you're going to a hospital, you need an advocate. I have some, we are concluded on this part. I have some gifts for Karen. Don't sit down. These are goodies for you as a way of all of us saying thank you. We've got some cookies from Cookie Time on the way for her flight home, a book to read by Katie Butler, a couple of little goodies in the back.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Actually, this is one I don't have.
You
I have so
have
many
them all.
death and dying books. I don't have this
Yeah.
one. Thank you all very much. I really had a good time. And I hope
It's
you can
signed.